I wrote on the way over. We went over in the beginning of 1945, on a troop ship. We were fighting to preserve something wonderful in America. Don't be such a big shot with my money.
At 99, Mel Brooks is finally peeling back the curtain on Rob Reiner, and the timing feels wild. Born Melvin Kaminsky on June 28, 1926, in Brooklyn, New York, Brooks came up rough and real. He was raised in a working-class Jewish household during the Great Depression, where every day was a grind. Losing his father at just 2 years old hit deep, leaving scars that never fully faded, but it also sharpened his edge, his hustle, and that razor-sharp mind. Comedy quickly turned into his armor and his weapon. For a small kid who was often overlooked, jokes were how he took control, earned respect, and held his ground in unforgiving city streets. Brooklyn shaped him loud and proud, with non-stop noise, radio comedy blasting, and Yiddish humor cutting through the chaos. He soaked up vaudeville timing, the fast talk of radio comics, and the bold bite of Jewish satire, stacking skills like street knowledge and never letting them go. All of that energy later exploded into a style that was reckless, fearless, and straight up outrageous. After high school, Brooks took a hard turn and joined the U.S. Army during World War II, serving as a combat engineer in Europe. He was literally out there dealing with landmines, staring danger in the face, learning real fast how insane human conflict could be. That mix of terror and dark irony stuck with him, shaping how he'd later roast the world with a smile. Those early scars and battlefield moments later showed up loud in his comedy. Mel Brooks had a natural urge to clown on fake power, blow up big egos, and expose tyrants and rigid ideas by laughing straight at them. After the war, he went all in on comedy, grinding as a stand-up and writer, chasing rooms where the jokes actually mattered. His big break hit when he landed on Sid Caesar's legendary TV runs, including Your Show of Shows and Caesar's Hour in the 1950s, where pressure was high and the laughs had to hit fast. That writer's room was stacked and ruthless in the best way. Brooks was working shoulder to shoulder with Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, and Woody Allen, a lineup that sounds unreal even now. The constant back and forth sharpened his instincts, forced discipline, and drilled in structure, timing, and character-driven humor that actually stuck. Every joke had to earn its spot, no shortcuts, no soft swings. Around that same time, Brooks locked in a lifelong creative bond with Carl Reiner. Their most famous bit, the 2,000-year-old man, put Brooks's wild improvisation on full display, mixing ancient wisdom with modern nonsense in a way nobody had seen before. When Brooks jumped from television to film, it wasn't just a career move, it was a straight-up shift in American comedy. His directorial debut, The Producers in 1967, was bold, risky, and totally unfiltered for its era. The plot alone shocked people. Two men trying to cash in on a Broadway flop by staging an intentionally offensive musical called Springtime for Hitler. It smashed taboos with sharp intelligence and fearless satire, leaving audiences stunned and laughing at the same time. But let's be clear, Brooks was never praising hate, he was clowning it hard. His whole move was to rip power away from Nazis by turning them into jokes, shrinking them down to pure ridicule. Yeah, it stirred controversy, but that was the point. When The Producers dropped, reactions were wild, but over time, it aged into a certified classic, even scoring Brooks an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. That win locked him in as more than just a troublemaker. It proved he was playing chess while others were playing checkers. The 1970s were straight up unstoppable for him. Brooks went on a legendary run, firing off comedy classics one after another. Blazing Saddles in 1974 went straight at racism and the fake hero myths of old westerns, using sharp satire and chaotic humor to expose the nonsense. That same year, Young Frankenstein showed a totally different side, lovingly honoring classic horror while flipping it on its head, proving Brooks knew film history inside and out. He didn't slow down for a second. Silent Movie in 1976 was a loud love letter to early cinema. while High Anxiety in 1977 playfully roasted Alfred Hitchcock's signature style. These films showed Brooks wasn't just pushing buttons for attention. He understood timing, visuals, genre rules, and exactly when to break them for maximum impact. What really set Brooks apart was balance. Beneath the wild jokes and physical comedy was heart and purpose. His humor carried warmth, humanity, and a belief that laughter could smack down cruelty, ignorance, and unchecked authority. He never punched down, ever. His target stayed locked on arrogance, bigotry, and fake power. In History of the World Part 1, 1981, and Spaceballs, 1987, he roasted epic films and sci-fi giants, not out of spite, but pure love for storytelling. Even beyond directing, Brooks showed serious range as a producer, proving his influence stretched way past the camera. Brooks also proved he wasn't boxed into comedy at all. Behind the scenes, he backed serious heavyweight projects like The Elephant Man in 1980 and Francis in 1982, showing real range and sharp taste beyond laughs. Then came a full-circle power move on Broadway. In 2001, he reinvented The Producers as a stage musical, and it absolutely exploded. The adaptation pulled in a record-breaking 12 Tony Awards, blasting his humor into a whole new generation and proving he was still very much in control deep into the 21st century. When the 2000s rolled in, Brooks didn't disappear, he was everywhere without forcing it. Comedy itself refused to let him fade. He slipped into pop culture like a familiar legend, popping up on The Simpsons with that unmistakable timing, dropping gems on Mad About You, and stealing moments on Curb Your Enthusiasm with sharp, self-aware humor that hit instantly. Even with short appearances, he had that rare skill of hijacking scenes. One line, one look, and suddenly everything revolved around him. True comedy icons don't lose their edge, and Brooks proved that over and over. His stop on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee stood out big time, delivering not just laughs, but real wisdom from a life spent shaping what modern comedy even looks like. At the same time, Brooks kept popping up in films with pure joy, dropping cameos that felt like gifts rather than quick appearances. One standout was the festive favorite, It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie, where his playful energy matched the Muppets' chaos perfectly. These moments didn't feel like someone chasing relevance, they felt like victory laps, loud reminders that his influence never faded and he was never satisfied living off old wins. He also kept pouring fire into musical theater. Broadway smash hits like The Producers and Young Frankenstein proved his humor hit just as hard on stage as it did on screen. New fans caught on fast, longtime fans stayed locked in, and Brooks once again showed he was a master storyteller who could flip formats without losing his edge. His appearance on the HBO special Mel Brooks and Dick Cavett Together Again hit with both warmth and clarity. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a sharp, funny reflection on decades of laughter, friendship, and cultural impact. Even deep into his later years, his voice stayed unmistakable, his timing still deadly, and his humor impossible to ignore. In 2015, Brooks surprised everyone again by stepping into animation as the eccentric and lovable Vlad in the hit Hotel Transylvania. His voice brought instant charm, cracking up younger viewers who were discovering his comedic magic for the very first time. The fun didn't stop there. He returned in Hotel Transylvania 3 Summer Vacation in 2018, proving loud and clear that age hadn't touched his timing, his energy, or that mischievous spark. Across television, film, theater, and animation, Brooks stayed unstoppable. He became living proof that real laughter doesn't expire and that a legendary career doesn't have to slow down just because time keeps moving. Then, in June 2025, he sent a shockwave of pure nostalgia through the entertainment world with an announcement fans had been waiting on for decades. The comedy icon revealed that Spaceballs 2 was officially in production, with plans targeting a 2027 release. The news instantly reignited the cult obsession around his sci-fi parody and lit up the internet with excitement. For longtime fans, it felt like a victory lap and a homecoming all at once. Clear proof that Mel Brooks' fearless, playful spirit is still alive, sharp, and ready to cause chaos again. Even decades after the original, Spaceballs locked itself into pop culture forever, the excitement somehow kept climbing. As if that announcement wasn't enough, that same month delivered another headline proving Brooks was still moving with creative momentum. It was announced he would serve as executive producer on Very Young Frankenstein, a new television project in development at FX, inspired by one of his most loved and legendary films. The series is set to remix familiar comic DNA through a fresh lens. It aims to blend classic Brooks-style humor with modern storytelling, keeping the spirit alive while updating the vibe. Together, these announcements felt massive, like a true turning point. It confirmed Brooks wasn't just looking back at a legendary career, he was actively shaping the future of comedy again, pulling new audiences in while respecting everything that came before.
Rewinding the clock way back, in 1951, when his career was still finding its footing and the legend wasn't written yet, Mel Brooks entered his first marriage with Florence Baum. They built a family during years filled with ambition, long hours, and the everyday grind of raising kids while chasing creative dreams. The couple welcomed 3 children, Stephanie, Nikki, and Eddie, who became the heart of Brooks's world during that era. Although the marriage ended in 1962, those years mattered deeply, shaping him as a man and a father, grounding him in real family life. And just as his comedic voice began rising in 1964, Brooks found a deeper, lasting partnership when he married the immensely talented actress Anne Bancroft, a union that would become one of the most iconic, creative, and personal bonds in Hollywood history. What followed wasn't just a marriage, it became one of Hollywood's most respected and intellectually powerful partnerships. Their bond lasted over 4 decades, standing strong until Anne Bancroft's passing in 2005. Together, they welcomed a son, Max Brooks, who later carved out his own successful path as a writer, extending the family's creative legacy into a new generation. Brooks often spoke about Bancroft as far more than a wife. She was his muse, his sounding board, and his emotional backbone. Her intelligence, warmth, and absolute belief in his talent shaped his confidence and his work in deep ways. He openly credited her as a driving force behind some of his most legendary projects, including The Producers and Young Frankenstein. In many ways, Bancroft was the quiet engine behind the laughter. She pushed Brooks to take risks, sharpen his ideas, and trust his instincts even when the stakes were high. Their marriage stood out in an industry known for short-lived relationships, becoming a rare example of lasting love and mutual respect. It remains one of the most human, meaningful chapters in Mel Brooks's life story, proving that behind the chaos and comedy was a partnership built on trust, encouragement, and real devotion. A truly remarkable life. At 99 years old, Mel Brooks has reached that point where reflection feels natural and honesty feels necessary. With nearly a full century behind him, the legendary filmmaker, writer, and comedian no longer feels pressure to sugarcoat anything or hide behind polished Hollywood myths. When Brooks speaks now, it's raw, direct, and real. So when Brooks speaks about Rob Reiner, it doesn't come off as gossip or old grudges. What comes through instead is clarity, respect, and recognition of a rare creative connection between 2 men who helped shape modern American comedy. Brooks starts by framing Reiner as more than just an actor or director, but as a serious cultural force born straight out of comedy royalty. Rob didn't just grow up around comedy, he breathed it. When your father is Carl Reiner, comedy isn't a job, it's the air in the room. Brooks makes it clear that Reiner inherited far more than a famous last name. He picked up discipline, timing, and a deep, almost moral seriousness about comedy as an art form. To Brooks, that seriousness is exactly what separated Rob Reiner from many of his peers and made him stand out in a crowded field. Looking back, Brooks says what impressed him most was how effortlessly Rob Reiner shifted from performer to director. A lot of funny people can make you laugh. Very few know how to listen to a story. Rob listened. To Brooks, that made all the difference. Reiner understood that comedy hits hardest when it's rooted in truth and real character, not just fast punchlines thrown at the wall. Brooks points out that Reiner's films, whether straight-up comedy or heavy drama, always treated the audience with intelligence and emotional respect. He also shuts down the idea that their styles were somehow clashing. People think I was all jokes and Rob was all heart. That's nonsense. I cared deeply about heart, and Rob had a wicked sense of humor. That balance in Brooks's eyes is what made Reiner special. Brooks explains that while his own work often leaned into satire and absurd extremes, Reiner's leaned more toward human connection. But both came from the same place, the need to tell stories that actually mattered. Comedy is just tragedy with good timing, Brooks says, adding that Rob understood that instinct without even trying. Now, speaking late in life, Brooks is blunt about Hollywood ego, saying it's rare to find someone like Reiner, someone driven by craft, not just credit.
For a guy, there were many producers that kind of hedged their bets. When I was doing bad jokes, when I had not yet found my way, which was reality was my way. Tell the truth.
Rob never needed to prove he was the smartest person in the room, Brooks says. That's real confidence. He contrasts that with filmmakers who confuse control with vision. Reiner, in Brooks' eyes, led with trust. Trust in actors, trust in writers, and trust in the material itself. That's why people followed him, Brooks adds. They felt safe, and safety breeds great work. That kind of leadership isn't loud, but it lasts. Brooks also takes time to highlight Reiner's moral compass, something he feels gets overlooked too often. Rob always knew where he stood, Brooks says, not politically, humanly. According to Brooks, Reiner believed films should ultimately affirm empathy and dignity, even when they dive into dark territory. That belief, Brooks suggests, is what gives Reiner's work its staying power. You don't leave his movies feeling smaller, Brooks explains. You leave feeling understood. As Brooks reaches the end of his reflections, his tone softens. Time has stripped away any urge for rivalry, leaving only appreciation. At 99, you count blessings, not box office numbers. Rob Reiner is one of those blessings. That final thought lands heavy, sincere, and full of respect. As Brooks looks at the comedy world today, he doesn't sound bitter or disconnected. He sounds hopeful. He acknowledges that times have changed, audiences have changed, and platforms have shifted. But the core of comedy, in his eyes, remains untouched. Truth still matters, heart still matters, and fearlessness still separates the great from the forgettable. Brooks makes it clear that real comedy isn't about chasing trends, it's about understanding people. He speaks about younger comedians and filmmakers with curiosity rather than judgment. Brooks says he sees flashes of brilliance when artists stop trying to shock for attention and start aiming for honesty instead. The laughs come after, he explains. To him, comedy has always been a byproduct of perspective, not volume. The louder the truth, the quieter the ego has to be. At 99, Brooks doesn't talk like someone clinging to relevance. He talks like someone who already knows where he stands. His legacy isn't something he feels the need to defend because it lives in the work, the people he influenced, and the laughter that keeps echoing across generations. He didn't just make jokes, he changed how comedy could speak truth without losing joy. And as he wraps these thoughts, one thing feels undeniable. Mel Brooks isn't just a survivor of Hollywood's past, he's a blueprint for its future, proof that wit, courage, and humanity can outlast time itself, and that laughter, when done right, never grows old. Even now, Brooks refuses to see comedy as something that belongs to any single generation. To him, laughter is shared property, passed down, reshaped and recharged by each new voice that dares to be honest. He believes the best comedy doesn't talk down to people or lecture them, it invites them in. That mindset is why his work still connects with audiences who weren't even born when his biggest films first hit screens. Brooks often emphasizes that longevity doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from trusting your instincts, even when they scare people or make executives nervous. He's open about the fact that many of his most iconic moments were risks that could have ended badly. But without risk, comedy loses its bite and becomes forgettable noise. Fearless choices are what turn jokes into history. At this stage of his life, Brooks sees his role less as a performer and more as a signal flare, a reminder that comedy can be sharp without being cruel, bold without being empty, and outrageous without losing its soul. He doesn't tell the next generation what to say, he challenges them to mean it. And that challenge might be his final, quiet gift to the art form he helped shape. Not rules, not instructions, just an example. Laugh hard, think deeper, and never forget that the best comedy comes from understanding people, not tearing them down.
As the years stack up, Brooks has become something rare in entertainment, a living bridge between comedy's past and its future. He carries stories from eras long gone, but he never treats them like museum pieces. To him, comedy is alive, breathing, and constantly evolving, and that belief keeps his voice relevant even now. He talks about timing as the real secret sauce, not just comic timing, but life timing, knowing when to push, when to pull back, and when to let silence do the work. Brooks believes too many people rush the laugh, forgetting that anticipation is half the magic. If you respect the pause,
He says the laugh will respect you back. That lesson shows up in everything he ever touched. Brooks also credits survival as part of the process. He lived through rejection, failure, war, loss, and massive success, and he never let any one chapter define him. That resilience, he says, is what allows comedy to stay honest instead of bitter. You can't make people laugh if you've given up on them. In the end, Brooks doesn't measure success by awards or applause anymore. He measures it by connection, by whether people still laugh together, still feel seen, still walk away lighter than they arrived. And judging by the generation still quoting his work, that connection is very much alive. At this point, Mel Brooks doesn't chase legacy. Legacy chases him. His influence shows up everywhere, in the rhythms of modern comedy, in the courage of filmmakers who dare to mix heart with madness, and in the way satire is still used to challenge power instead of bowing to it. Even when his name isn't mentioned, his fingerprints are all over the art form. Brooks often says the biggest mistake artists make is forgetting why they started. For him, it was never about fame or approval. It was about survival, connection, and finding light in dark places. That mindset kept his work grounded, even when it was wildly exaggerated. The joke always served a purpose, even when it looked ridiculous. He also believes humor is strongest when it comes from empathy. You don't need to crush people to be funny. The real punch lands when the audience recognizes themselves in the chaos. Brooks's comedy invited people to laugh at shared flaws, not feel ashamed of them, and that's why it aged without losing its power. As his story continues to be told and retold, one thing stays clear. Mel Brooks didn't just entertain the world, he gave it permission to laugh through fear, confusion, and change. And that permission might be his most lasting contribution of all. As Mel Brooks looks toward the future, he does so with humor, not hesitation. He's never been interested in pretending he has all the answers, only in asking the right questions through laughter. To him, comedy has always been a conversation, not a lecture, and that mindset keeps his work feeling human instead of preachy. He often talks about curiosity as the real engine behind creativity. The moment you stop being curious, you stop being funny. Brooks believes staying open to new voices, new rhythms, and new perspectives is what keeps comedy alive. Age, in his view, isn't a limitation. It's a library of experiences you can pull from if you're brave enough. Even now, his presence carries weight, not because he demands attention, but because he earned it. Younger comedians may not copy his style, but they inherit his permission to be bold, to question authority, and to trust their instincts even when the room feels uncomfortable. That invisible influence might be his loudest impact. In the end, Brooks still sees laughter as an act of defiance, a way to push back against fear, cruelty, and nonsense without losing compassion. And as long as people keep laughing at the absurdity of power and the chaos of being human, Mel Brooks' spirit will keep echoing through comedy, loud, fearless, and alive. In quieter moments, Brooks reflects on how laughter carried him through everything. War, loss, rejection, success, and heartbreak all blurred together over time, but humor stayed constant. He believes comedy didn't just give him a career, it gave him balance, a way to process pain without becoming hardened by it, and a way to speak truth without losing kindness. He often points out that the best jokes come from listening, not talking, watching people, understanding their fears, their pride, their contradictions. Brooks says comedy fails the moment it stops paying attention to humanity. That's why his work never felt empty, even at its wildest. Beneath the chaos, there was always recognition, a wink that said, "Yeah, I see you." Brooks also understands that influence isn't always visible right away. Sometimes it shows up years later, when a new filmmaker takes a risk or a young writer chooses honesty over safety.
Those ripple effects matter more to him than applause. They mean the message landed and kept moving. At this stage of life, Brooks doesn't rush anything. He laughs when he wants, speaks when it matters, and rests knowing his voice already made its mark, not just in movies or scripts, but in how comedy learned to be brave, thoughtful, and human all at once.
As the story of Mel Brooks keeps unfolding, one truth stands tall above the rest. Comedy, for him, was never about escape. It was about confrontation, confronting fear with laughter, confronting power with satire, and confronting pain with honesty. That fearless approach is what made his voice impossible to ignore and impossible to replace. Brooks often says that laughter is strongest when it's shared. A room full of people laughing together creates understanding without speeches or slogans. That belief shaped everything he made, from outrageous parodies to quieter, character-driven moments. He didn't chase applause, he chased connection, and the applause followed naturally. He also understood restraint, something many overlook. Knowing when to pull back gave his boldest jokes room to breathe. Brooks believed comedy should surprise people, not exhaust them. That sense of control is why his work still feels sharp instead of dated, even decades later. Now, as generations continue discovering his films, shows, and ideas, Brooks's impact keeps expanding, not because he demanded attention, but because his work earned it. His legacy isn't frozen in the past, it's alive in every laugh that dares to challenge fear with joy and chaos with clarity. When people ask Brooks how he wants to be remembered, he rarely gives a direct answer. Not because he hasn't thought about it, but because he believes legacy isn't something you control, it's something other people carry forward. If they laugh, if they feel seen, if they feel a little braver, then he knows he did his job. Brooks often circles back to gratitude. Gratitude for surviving long enough to tell his stories, for collaborators who trusted him, and for audiences who kept showing up generation after generation. He never pretended comedy was a solo act. Every laugh, in his eyes, was a shared moment built by many hands and minds. He also recognizes that comedy reflects its time, but great comedy outlives it. Jokes tied only to trends fade fast, but jokes rooted in human behavior stick around. That's why Brooks's work keeps resurfacing, quoted, referenced, and rediscovered by people who weren't even born when it was created. As his journey continues to inspire, one thing remains clear. Mel Brooks didn't just make comedy for his era, he made comedy for people. And as long as people keep laughing at power, absurdity, and themselves, his voice will never truly go quiet. Brooks admits history will probably file their names in different chapters of comedy, but underneath it all, he sees the same mission. We both wanted the same thing, to make people laugh, yes, but more importantly, to make them feel a little less alone. That line hits harder than any headline ever could because it comes from someone who's seen it all and doesn't need hype to speak truth. Mel Brooks's truth about Rob Reiner isn't scandal, shock, or drama. It's deeper than that. It's about respect earned over decades, talent recognized without jealousy, and a friendship built on shared values instead of shared credits. It's the perspective of a man who lived long enough to watch comedy change, bend, survive, and still matter. In the end, Brooks's words feel like a final, generous nod from one master to another, a quiet acknowledgement of a fellow storyteller who understood the responsibility behind the laughs and got it right when it counted. No ego, no bitterness, just honesty, gratitude, and heart. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives like this, share it with someone who loves comedy, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Your support keeps these stories alive and the conversation going.